Welcome to the Lift Every Voice podcast, where we explore books by contemplative writers of color. I'm Christine Valters Paintner.
And I'm Claudia Love Mair. We are joined each month by the author of our book club selection. Together, we explore how increasing our diversity of perspectives on contemplative practice can enrich our experience of the Christian mystical tradition.
We encourage you to join us by reading the book, listening to the conversations, and engaging with the reflection questions on our website at abbeyofthearts.com. Welcome, everyone, to our Lift Every Voice book club, and we are delighted today to be joined by Therese Taylor-Stinson, who is joining us for the second time in our book club podcast. We're very excited about that. I also have Claudia Love Mair here with me, as always, my delightful partner in conversation. But just to introduce Therese, she is an ordained deacon and ruling elder in the Presbyterian Church. She's also a spiritual director who is trained at the Shalem Institute, and she's also edited and written several books. And the first book that we discussed together a couple of years ago now was this beautiful book, Embodied Spirit, Stories of Spiritual Directors of Color. And she's also the founder of the Spiritual Directors of Color Network. She's also a Wisdom Council member here at Abbey of the Arts, and she leads Centering Prayer for Us, and she's led a couple of retreats on Harriet Tubman and Howard Thurman. I know she's also trained as an emotional emancipation facilitator, and if there's anything else that you want to add, Therese, we could do that. But today we're discussing Walking the Way of Harriet Tubman, Public Mystic and Freedom Fighter, a beautiful, powerful book, and we're really excited. So welcome, Therese. We're glad to have you back.
Thank you. Wait, Claudia, your book cover is different from Christine's.
I got an ARC.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I had to buy my copy because they sent me a digital copy, but I like I like to be able to write it.
I would say, wait, what is that?
So, Claudia Love, do you want to kick us up?
Yes. Therese, could you describe what a public mystic is?
So basically, a public mystic is someone who uses their gifts, their spirituality to help their communities in some way, to bear fruit in their communities. So in the African indigenous tradition, everybody basically has the possibility to be a public mystic, because what we call God, they refer to mostly generally as the supreme being, but that's not where your interaction takes place. The supreme being created the earth and everything in it, including us, and has poured into us gifts, which we are to uncover, discover, and those gifts are for a community, not just for us to go around and say how smart we are, how gifted we are, or anything of that nature. And so public mystic, the term public mystic was coined by Barbara Holmes, and I couldn't leave it behind.
She's a good person to quote from, for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you.
That's lovely. So this book is, obviously about the spiritual, mystical journey of Harriet Tubman. And I was really moved by the fact that she had an early brain injury, which led her to have all these visions, which she really drew upon to help direct her towards freedom. And I found that was a really powerful witness, especially as someone who deals with chronic illness, in the ways that the God or the holy can help work through our limitations, and then to do this phenomenal work that she did. So can you tell us more about her mystical experiences in connection with her brain injury, and how that impacted her own journey and her leading to people to freedom?
So I suspect that Harriet Tubman was always having visions. It did not start with her brain injury. However, when she had her brain injury, she was only 12 years old. and she was in a store, and a overseer was with a young boy, young enslaved boy, and he was trying to run away from him, and he took up a 2-pound weight and threw it at him. And it's not certain whether Harriet deliberately stepped in front of the boy to keep the weight from hitting him and it hit her, or it just ended up aiming her way. But the amazing thing about it is that despite that disability and others, she didn't have much education, so she didn't speak, a lot of English or anything like that. Her community, gave her skills and things that she knew, that probably she was only about 2 generations removed from the Africans who came through the Middle Passage. And so surely around her parents and other family members and people that were enslaved in the same area she was, taught her things about indigenous practices, about how to use the land, how to use the sky to find direction, and all of those things that helped her. And so the way I see her brain injury is that she used it, rather than, letting it deter her. She found ways to use it to move forward. And she would have visions. What it would do, she had a kind of narcolepsy that didn't really put her to sleep, but sort of put her in a trance-like state, and she would have dreams. And she just assumed that the dreams were coming from the divine. And she would then, when she would wake up, tell them to change directions or some other thing that seemed pertinent for them to get to freedom. And it must have worked, because as far as we know, they say she never lost anybody in her treks to freedom.
Such a powerful witness. Yeah, I love that.
And, it speaks to internal liberation too. She had such a deep belief in herself, and that she was doing what she was called to do. As Thurman would say, she had definitely found the genuine in herself. And so it didn't really matter to her who was chasing her, what they were calling her, or anything. The only thing she was concerned about is that for every trip she took to bring people to freedom, that they did exactly what she said. And there is a story in some of the biographies she has, that the first people she wanted to bring to freedom were her family. So one of her brothers were with her, and he left his wife and children behind. And they got maybe midway, and they were getting ready to cross a river, I think, and he didn't want to go. And she took her gun. She had a gun. She took her gun and stuck it to his head and said, "You will be free or die."
Wow.
So that's how she didn't play.
She knew what she needed to do, for sure. Oh, thank you for that.
The Black church seems to be dying out in favor of mega churches, in favor of a lot of non-denominational churches, in favor of white spiritual spaces. Is a connection to African cosmology important for the descendants of enslaved Africans?
Well, I absolutely think so. Somebody else may think something differently. But I think that the reason why we need to know African cosmology, the reason why we need to know the culture, the African culture, is because that's where we come from. And those of our ancestors who came through the Middle Passage had all of that, their language, everything taken from them. And I grieve pretty much every day, because I see so many African Americans who have just bought into this culture that I don't just think oppresses Black people. I think it oppresses most people in some kind of way, and if not the European or American culture, even if you go to other places where they may have different versions of culture, there's still, some group of people who sort of dominate everyone. So I think that for us to find our internalized freedom, for us to really know the genuine in ourselves, to know who we really are, we need to know something about where we come from. And we need to know the gifts that were before what a lot of things that happen now that came from Africa. In doing my DNA and my husband's DNA as well, and a lot of our family members and everything. But it started with me, and then I got Bernard involved in getting his DNA done. And it was revealed when Bernard's DNA was done that he's 90% African, and his earliest DNA relative is Ramesses III. And Ramesses III was a seafarer who used to bring Black Africans over to the Americas sometime about 1292 BC. And this is my husband's oldest DNA relative. And so what a blessing to know. I can't say that about myself, but what a blessing to know that about yourself and what your connections are, what those things can tell you. I'm doing a project right now with my family DNA to the extent that I'm able. And as I learn things about the family, things that I knew growing up or saw growing up, but now see from other stories of the family, the more I understand how we do the things we do, or what the sayings that my grandmother used to have. She would always have one of those little pithy sayings, and sometimes it came in song. Sometimes she would burst into song, singing things about it. So I definitely believe that knowing our ancestry, knowing African cosmology and being able to understand it, and also still being genuinely who we are, so we can, as my uncle used to say, eat the meat and throw away the bones.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I'm wondering, I was going to ask you about, you talk a lot about emotional freedom, her emotional freedom and physical freedom. And I just, as kind of a lead into that, I was thinking, I wonder if that being steeped in one's own kind of indigenous mystical practices, if that contributes to that sense of emotional freedom. Like, is there, I get the sense that there's a sense that when we know who we are and who we came from, that it helps. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about what does emotional freedom mean, actually, and what you describe, for Harriet, that the emotional freedom was just as important as the physical freedom, and they didn't always come together. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
So I think actually the emotional freedom is probably more important than the physical freedom, and what we're still struggling with today. And the difference is that if you are grounded in who you are, and if you can stay there, it's not easy all the time, and sometimes you feel, I'm speaking as a person of color, sometimes you may feel like you have to behave in another way in order to protect yourself. But I think that is the goal. In Harriet's case, she started out, she had free people in her family. Her father was free, and then she got married. Her husband was free, but the way the law went was that the enslaved belonged to whatever the status of the mother. So she knew if she had any children with her husband, they would be enslaved. So that was one of her things to making her want to find freedom. And she wanted to be free, but she saw these things, and I'm imagining beyond that with the her ancestors with the mothers and fathers and grandmothers and aunts and people, that a community that was around her, that probably some of them were people who came through the Middle Passage and knew something about where they came from. They shared those things with one another. Those things helped Harriet to be able to find in her environment ways to put a baby to sleep when she needed them to be quiet, or to help one of the Union soldiers who was in pain from an injury. All of those things she learned. And when she decided to run away, she knew how to go north, because in African traditions, they used the sky. As a matter of fact, not just African traditions, this just came to me, that, if you know the story of Jesus's birth, I'm forgetting what the Magi saw the star in the sky and followed that in that direction to find where Jesus was born. So these things are passed down. It's part of what humans do, and maybe other ways of life also have of intelligence. And so I think and when she moved further north, when she got to New York, which was not a slave state, nevertheless there was still prejudice and things of that nature. And when she got there, she found out that it wasn't just Black people who were necessarily oppressed either. She found that women were oppressed. And so I call her also the first womanist. And womanist is a term that was created by Alice Walker, who said, that when we were younger and our parents or family members were fussing at us, they would say, "Stop acting so womanish." So she changed it into womanist. And the idea of a womanist is that we not only think about the things that oppress us as females, but we also remember who we came from and who our family members are. So we are just as concerned about the liberation of our brothers, our uncles, our fathers and grandfathers and so forth. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah. I just wanted to give a little quote here from your book, because you said that she learned freedom was more than a physical relocation. It was a relocation of their identity as children of a loving and merciful God. And I think that's such a beautiful image, that not only was she leading them to this physical freedom, but giving them this not even a new identity, but the original identity, that they come to, that we all come to Earth with. So beautiful. Thank you for that.
In the book, I tell this story, just really amusing to me.
Yeah.
They were on their way to Canada, and they were crossing over a bridge, and the Niagara Falls around them. And she would turn and yell back, and she was talking to one particular person. I think his name was Joe, and she said, "Joe, look at the falls, look at the falls." He was very frightened the whole time. And so he wouldn't look at the falls. All he wanted to do was get to the other side of the bridge. And so they get to the other side, and they step into Canada, and she says, "We're free, we're free. Hey, Joe, you're free." And he says, "Yes, and the next time I'm free, I'll be going to heaven." And then she said, "Well, you could have at least looked at the falls before you went to heaven."
I love that story, because it just sort of makes me think of how, like, part of the freedom is being able to savor, those God-infused moments as we walk through our lives, even on the journey to freedom, because obviously we're never fully there. Thank you for that.
I loved your chapter, Who Seeks Freedom. It was, I don't know, invigorating. But I also found your description of who remains bound compelling. Could you share more deeply about who remains bound?
So, can you read part of it to me, and then maybe I could talk about it? Do you have it there?
Yeah, let me get to that chapter.
Okay.
Oh,
I don't remember everything verbatim.
oh,
Yeah, yes.
I love the apothecary. Apothecary, and then a practice. I love, why did you choose that
Mhm.
structure while I'm looking?
Because that's what Harriet did. First of all, I have been on a trek to Cambridge where we walked in Harriet's footsteps. And so she probably was in, we were in the store where she was hit. She probably was in an apothecary at the time. And, and so, and also on her treks to freedom, as I mentioned earlier, she used things she learned from her ancestors about herbs and things in the natural environment that could help relieve pain or allow someone to sleep and those different things. So to me, and also in this area anyway, I'm in the Washington D.C. area, there is a place called Harriet's Apothecary. I've actually seen another one of those kinds of places too. So in my book, of course, I don't have herbs or medicinals to put in the book, but I know of a lot of different people: Thurman, Alice Walker, Toni Morrison. Probably can't think of everybody at the moment, that have given us, wisdom of some sort, or encouragement that would lead us to the same place Harriet was leading her people. And so the way I used that area, I wanted to give an opportunity for people to not just read a story, or be encouraged to do something without any direction. So I use those different people, and that's why I call it an apothecary, because I just sort of picked this one here and there, and they could read something and have a meditation or an exercise of some sort that helped them to deeply understand it.
Fantastic. On page 58, but who remains bound? Those who allow the dominant culture to define them, those who place more importance on economics than their own soul and the souls of their siblings, those who do not see freedom in the community of their birth, those who fail to do the hard work of finding the genuine in themselves. Until I learned to love myself, I found it hard to genuinely love others. Without self-love, true freedom is unattainable.
So I've been a spiritual director now for about 17 years. And actually I spend a lot of time now. Most of my directees are people of color. And I spend a lot of my time with them, actually helping them to see their own internalized self and encouraging them to live that way. And so we can all be bound. It's not that hard in the culture we're in. Christine mentioned earlier that I'm an emotional emancipation circle facilitator. And as you all probably know, there have been some incidents in Tennessee and other places lately that again have us, grieving. And so, if I take, for example, the 3 or 4 officers, Black officers, who killed this young man, for what? For what? It was supposed to be a traffic stop, and brutally beat him and everything. And these are Black people, so the same thing could happen to them. But somehow they've become bound up in the system. That's what I think. And actually, I understand after the incident, when they were talking about it, that they were a special unit, and so they were supposed to do these things to sort of give a message, I guess, that if you don't do what you're told or whatever, you're in danger of losing your life. But I think that they are people who have been bound by the culture, by the dominant culture, and may not even totally be aware that that's what's happening to them. So that's why I put that in there, that, these are the things that can lead us to freedom. But so in case you're one of these people that's arguing with me about freedom, this is what being bound looks like. So that's what the purpose was for that chapter.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate that distinction, because I think, we think that, in Western culture, there's no more, we're no longer enslaved, but we are, all of us, and certainly some people suffer much more at the hands of the system than others. But yes, there's just the way that capitalism is designed. We're enslaved on all these different levels. So I love the invitation you have to think about the ways that we're bound. And you also talk about how Harriet tried 3 times for freedom first, but she had fears which really thwarted her ability to move through that. And I was really touched by that too, because I thought, here's a woman who's seems very self-assured, and she's very God guided, and yet, I think we could all relate to fears stopping us, in our tracks. So do you have a sense from Harriet's wisdom and from your own work in spiritual direction, how do we cultivate the endurance we need to keep at it, even when the fears keep stopping us? How do we keep going?
You have to want to do it.
Yeah.
and it's funny because I think that this is the way my life is unfolding now, and having gone through the spiritual guidance program, and learning about spiritual development, and Richard Rohr's ideas about the 2 halves of life, which I understand there are actually 3 parts now, not just the 2 parts, the 3rd part being when we get to a stage where we know at some point this part of our life is coming to an end. And so there's some adjustments that happen. But I think that when the supreme being, if we use word coming from the African tradition, or me, I don't want to use God anymore. I want to say something greater than, and a little bit indescribable, but that which is bigger than us. Or as I remember now, Tilden Edwards saying it's like we're in a womb, that the whole thing, we're sort of in a womb. But whatever that is that gave life and gave us the abilities that we have now, perfection is not the way somehow we've learned it from our human existence, that, if we do something perfectly, if we make just the right book or a piece of furniture or a building or something like that, then somehow we're great. I think we spend our whole life actually moving to learning, and questioning, and finding out why things happen. And unfortunately, I think a lot of times we learn the most, and we are more able to deepen when it's something that's a little more painful, when it's something that causes you to have to really pause and say, where am I and where am I going? I've had such an incident in my own life that pretty much silenced me. I didn't really say many prayers or anything. And it's funny because I do have a little bit of a different theology overall now, but some things that you learn as a child never go away. So the only word, when I was in this kind of silence phase, the only word that I could think of was Jesus. Mm-hmm. But I think that we're all in this place, some people's troubles may look worse than others, but and Matthew Fox says, if you can't read the Bible, look at nature. So look at nature. We live in a forest and so it's a urban forest, but it's still a forest. But look at the trees. The trees exhale oxygen, which we inhale, and we exhale carbon monoxide, which they inhale. This is a whole web of connection going on here. And somehow we humans have sort of put ourselves above it or something like that. And I think the more we become more connected with the whole, the more we will begin to see the genuine in ourselves.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I'm thinking of the mystic Teilhard de Chardin talks about the breathing together of all things, and I love that. So I love the way. So public mystic is about being bound up with our fellow persons, but also all of creation, and I love that. Yeah, I love that image. Thanks for that.
And all of us don't have the same gifts, and some gifts may seem more lofty than others or whatever, but we all have something to give to this planet, this life that we're having here. And I think that's why we're all here. It's not about just being humans or, being above other people in some kind of way.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
On page 100, you wrote, to escape your enslavers is to take ownership of your life. I can see by the rest of my question that I was thinking about the police and how policing, as we know it here, started during slavery with the slave patrols, and it just kind of progressed from there. People say the police system is broken, but it's not. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do centuries ago. But here we are in a time where people that look like us still get followed around when we go to the store. I went to an Italian restaurant once, and the hostess walked up to me and she said, "We don't serve fried chicken here," as if I went to an Italian restaurant to get fried chicken. This was in the North. This was not here in Kentucky. This was in Michigan. But it's everywhere in the United States. And, a 16-year-old Black boy was shot in the head because he rang someone's doorbell, the wrong doorbell. And these are hard times we're in. We have some of the same issues that we had 50 years ago or more. And how do you take ownership of your life, especially, as a person of color, when your life is constantly being threatened?
You have to be brave like Harriet. Mama Harriet was brave. And so she said, be free or die. So it really is sort of a choice. Either you try to be comfortable with the current situation, or you find your freedom, even if it's it's not going to happen to everybody. But Harriet, if we look at the people who have helped us to get to some place where we are now, sort of. I'm kind of not sure where we are, but right. Anyway, they tried. Someone bold enough. We're talking about like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and then if we go back in history, there was Joan of Arc, and there's all kinds of people that, Jesus is not the only person who's been on the cross, and not the only person on the cross now, and as you think about Carl Jung, my religion goes between psychology and theology, but, Carl Jung says that when you have some kind of adverse feelings toward another person, it's really you that you're frowning at. You're just projecting it onto someone else. And so a lot of what happens is people projecting, something negative that they don't like about themselves, or maybe some things that have happened in their lives, that have caused them to be in a different place than most other people or something. And so you just have to be determined and you have to be aware of those things. Anne Ulanoff, who's I don't know if she's still there or not, but she was a professor at Columbia University in New York, and she wrote a book called Religion and the Unconscious, and she said that one of the things that you have to do is to pay attention to your own projections. If you want to love yourself, you have to pay attention to your own projections.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Therese, you've mentioned a couple of times now the idea of the sound of the genuine, which I know is one of your favorite ideas from Howard Thurman. It's a beautiful image. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what the sound of the genuine is. And you describe it as a compass in your book. How do we hear this sound in our lives when everything outside is so noisy, and even when we quiet down inside, it's so noisy?
Would you mind? I don't know if I put this in that book or not, because it's a little bit long. But if you don't mind, I can read from Thurman.
Yeah, sure. I do not mind at all.
In 1980, which was really just a few months before his death, Thurman gave the commencement address at Spelman College in Atlanta, which is an all-female university and one of the most renowned in the country. And this is what he told them in his commencement address. It's kind of long, and he repeats some things over and over again, but for me, it is something that I try to remember constantly. He says, there is something in every one of you that waits, listens for the sound of the genuine in yourself. And if you cannot hear it, you will never find whatever it is for which you are searching. And if you hear it and then cannot follow it, it was better that you had never been born. You are the only you that has ever lived. Your idiom is the only idiom of its kind in all of existence. And if you cannot hear the sound of the genuine in you, you will all your life spend your days on the ends of strings that somebody else pulls. There is in you something that waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in yourself. And sometimes there is so much traffic going on in your minds, so many different kinds of signals, so many vast impulses floating through your organism that go back thousands of generations, long before you were even a thought in the mind of creation. And you are buffeted by these. And in the midst of all of this, you have got to find out what your name is. Who are you? How does the sound of the genuine come through to you? The sound of the genuine is flowing through you. Don't be deceived and thrown off by all the noises that are part of even your dreams, your ambitions, so that you don't hear the sound of the genuine in you, because that is the only true guide that you will ever have. And if you don't have that, you don't have a thing. Mm-hmm. You may be famous, you may be whatever the other ideals are, which are part of this generation, but you know you don't have the foggiest notion of who you are, where you are going, what you want. Cultivate the discipline of listening to the sound of the genuine in yourself. Now, there is something in everybody that waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in other people. And it is so easy to say that anybody who looks like him or her, anybody who acts as this person acts, can't hear any sound of the genuine. I must wait and listen for the sound of the genuine in you. I must wait. For if I cannot hear it, then in my scheme of things, you are not even present. And everybody wants to feel that everybody else knows that he or she is there. I have a blind friend who just became blind after she was a grown woman. I asked her, what is the greatest disaster that your blindness has brought to you? She said, when I go places where there are people, I have a feeling that nobody knows I'm here. I can't see any recognition. I can't see. And if nobody knows that I'm here, it's hard for me to know where I am. There is something that waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in your mother, in your father, in the people you can't stand. And if you had the power, you would wipe them out. but instinctively, you know that if you wipe them out, you go with them. So you fight for your own life by finding some way to get along with them without killing them. There is something in you that waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in other people. And if you can't hear it, then you are reduced by that much. If I were to ask you what is the thing that you desire most in life this afternoon, you would say a lot of things off the top of your head, but most of which you wouldn't believe, but you would think that you were saying the things that I thought you ought to think and what you ought to say. But I think that if you were stripped to whatever there is in you that is literal and irreducible, and you try to answer that question, the answer may be something like this: I want to feel that I am thoroughly and completely understood, so that now and then I can take my guard down and look around me and not feel that I will be destroyed with my defenses down. I want to feel completely vulnerable, completely naked, completely exposed, and absolutely secure. That is what you look for in your children when you have them. That is what you look for in your husband if you get one. That I can run the risk of radical exposure and know that the eye that beholds my vulnerability will not step on me. That I can feel secure in my awareness of the active presence of my own idiom in me. So as I lived my life then, this is what I'm trying to fulfill. It doesn't matter whether I become a doctor, lawyer, housewife. I'm secure because I hear the sound of the genuine in myself, and having learned to listen to that, I can become quiet enough, still enough to hear the sound of the genuine in you. Now, if I hear the sound of the genuine in me, and if you hear the sound of the genuine in you, it is possible for me to go down in me and come up in you. So that when I look at myself through your eyes, having made that pilgrimage, I see in me what you see in me, and the wall that separates and divides will disappear, and we will become one because the sound of the genuine makes the same music.
Stunning. Stunning. I've read that, but it was really beautiful to hear you say that aloud. And what I love, I think, so much is that it's such a communal, relational kind of calling. It's not about just finding our true self, alone. It has to be witnessed by another and seen through the eyes of another.
And that's very African.
Mm-hmm.
Because in African cosmology, you learn who you are from your community. And I can tell you, because I've been with Africans in America who have left Africa and come to America so that they could be their genuine self, because sometimes your community pushes onto you things they need more so than come from who you really are,
Sure. Yeah.
But that is the African cosmology, that from your community, you learn to define yourself.
Yeah, and it seems so tragic that in the Western culture, we so prize individualism that we've lost then the ability to have those relationships where people can see us so deeply and truly. Yeah, thank you for that. Beautiful.
I was at Martin Luther King celebration in January, and they had this lovely white woman singing a Negro spiritual, and I felt some kind of way about it. I know that, our white brothers and sisters have sang these songs in their churches, but here was a very specific event centered around a social justice, civil rights leader. And what I felt most was that these are not her stories, that the spirituals kept us alive. It kept us going. We coded information in the spirituals. So
Yeah,
they
it's
were,
how we communicated with one another.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, so central, to who we are, to how we got from there to who we are right now. And it seems like these songs are dying out. These what they call Negro spirituals are dying out, and it makes me so sad. Even the song "Lift Every Voice and Sing," which we actually named our book club "Lift Every Voice," which tells a powerful story. And you asked, how can storytelling help motivate others toward a more authentic freedom today? These songs are dying. So what are some of the ways that you found to motivate through stories when we've got YouTube and we've got TikTok and storytelling is not what it used to be?
So hopefully I just did it with Harriet. Because that was the whole purpose. What you again mentioning that I'm an emotional emancipation circle facilitator. So we have circles and we show PowerPoints and we try to help people to be able to recognize their trauma and what to do to sort of overcome that and all of that kind of thing. But that's a small group of people. But what other way to reach somebody is to tell the story of somebody who actually did it. And they didn't have a lot of fancy things to get them there either. As a matter of fact, they probably came close to losing their own lives, but they lived to be in their 90s, and they saw all these other people to freedom. And they had their, and for them to do that, the story about Harriet, after she's hit with this weight, she's disabled in some ways, and so she can't work, and so she's by herself all the time, and she has to get better. She can't respond like she was before and different things like that, so she's unable, the enslaver is unable to sell her out to somebody. And so at some point she asked and they allow her to go sell herself out. And then, but in order for her to do that, whatever her fee is from the person, she has to share it with the enslaver that lets her go find her work for herself. And so they thought that, she was small and had all these injuries and she couldn't do any of these things. So it was because she knew who she was. She knew where she came from, and she knew how to do things to help heal herself in some kind of way, or to overcome things that could not be healed. And this woman now, last year was the celebration of her 200th birthday anniversary. Some 200 years later, she's still being seen and heard and talked about. When I was trying to figure out what to write for Broadleaf Books, I said I wanted to write about Harriet because she was affecting me emotionally in some way. I wanted to write about it. But I didn't really want to write her biography again because there were already like 35 books. That's just on Amazon for her biography. So this book that I wrote was my way of helping other people, sort of at least have some idea that there is a journey we can take. There is something that we can do to become more free, because I think we're here for that, actually. All of us are here to try to figure out how we become a better creation.
I think you definitely told some great stories in Walking the Way of Harriet Tubman. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, Therese, we're coming towards the end of our time, so I wondered if, to close us out, if you would mind reading your beautiful prayer that you wrote, inspired by Maya Angelou. It's on page 140 and 141, and you in the Harriet's Apothecary, where you invite people to write their own prayer for freedom, and this is your offering as an example, but I think also a celebration of who you are and who Harriet was.
Christine, maybe you want to read it?
That's no problem.
Okay.
So I will read Therese's beautiful prayer inspired by Maya Angelou. I want to know what makes the caged bird sing. Is it the presence or the absence of sound? What is the bird trying to communicate? Or has God just given us music and accompaniment in nature? I love the caged bird's proximity to me, but sometimes I free it because it too is the image of God. I want to know why love is so hard, why we love so deeply, yet we still find ways to create deep wounds. Could it be we have not found the source of our being? Or could it be our experience of love is incomplete? I want to know. I want to know. I want to know so I can love and live with my whole heart.
You know, when other people read, sometimes when when I read things I've written, I'm like, who wrote that?
Well, hopefully I did some justice to that, Therese. And,
it was beautiful.
Well, thank you so much for being with us and talking about this beautiful book, Walking the Way of Harriet Tubman, public mystic and freedom fighter. It really, I found it really powerful on so many levels and made me think about mysticism in a number of new ways. So we're really grateful to have you here and to have you as part of the Abbey of the Arts.
Yes, and I'm grateful to be here. Thank you for having me. And I enjoyed this talk with you and Claudia. It was better than the first one, I think, with embodied spirits. I'm getting the hang of this now.